November 9th, 1989. Thousands of East Berliners surge toward the wall that has divided their city for 28 years. Confused border guards, overwhelmed by the crowd, do something unthinkable. They open the gates. By morning, people are tearing the wall down with hammers and their bare hands. The Cold War's most powerful symbol crumbles almost by accident. But what if those guards had held the line? What if the wall had stood and the Soviet order it protected had endured? By 1989, the Soviet Union was straining under economic stagnation and a wave of reform sweeping across Eastern Europe. Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika had loosened Moscow's grip, and one by one, communist governments in Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia were collapsing or reforming. East Germany's leadership was desperate to control the growing unrest. When a government spokesman misspoke at a press conference, announcing new travel rules would take effect immediately instead of the next day, crowds rushed to the checkpoints that same night, believing the border was finally open. Border guards, receiving no clear orders from above, faced an impossible choice: fire on the crowd or step aside. They stepped aside. But suppose Moscow had sent different instructions. Picture the alternate timeline. Gorbachev, alarmed by the scale of unrest, orders East German and Soviet forces to reinforce the border rather than stand down. The same hardline response the Soviet Union had used to crush uprisings in Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. Guards receive explicit orders to hold the checkpoints by force if necessary. The crowd, faced with armed resistance, is pushed back. East Germany's government, propped up by a renewed show of Soviet strength, survives the night, and the wall remains standing through the winter of 1989. The peaceful revolutions elsewhere in Eastern Europe would not simply stop, but a violent crackdown in Berlin could have emboldened hardliners in Moscow and other capitals to follow suit, buying the Soviet system years it desperately needed. With the wall still standing, German reunification, which historically followed within a year, would have been delayed indefinitely, or perhaps prevented altogether. NATO's eastward expansion throughout the 1990s and 2000s would have unfolded very differently, if at all, with a divided Germany remaining a frozen front line of the Cold War. The Soviet Union itself, though still weakened by economic troubles, might have survived longer without the symbolic and political collapse that Berlin triggered across the Eastern Bloc. Gorbachev's own position could have shifted, potentially empowering hardliners who saw the wall's survival as proof that firm action could still hold the system together. Some historians argue the Soviet collapse was already inevitable by the late 1980s, driven by economic failure no crackdown could fix. But a wall that held in 1989 could have reshaped the timeline of the Cold War's end and the map of Europe that followed. The wall fell not through a grand plan, but through a bureaucratic mistake, a confused announcement, and guards who chose not to fire. Gorbachev's reluctance to authorize force, the East German government's collapsing authority, and the sheer size of the crowd that night, any one of these threads pulled differently could have kept the wall standing. Had Moscow given a harder order, had the spokesman's announcement been clearer, Had the guards received explicit instructions before the crowd arrived? The Cold War's ending and the Europe we know today could look entirely different. History rarely turns on grand inevitabilities. It turns on a mistranslated sentence and a handful of guards deciding not to shoot. The fall of the Berlin Wall reminds us that the world we live in today was never guaranteed. It ended not with an order, but with silence, where an order should have